Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It is a rainy Wednesday night here in Auckland, New Zealand, but the sun was shining at Trent Bridge and it was also shining on the Indian cricket team as they took a 3-0 victory in the T20s against Sri Lanka. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll also get some New Zealand cricket news in as well. Stu, you'll be happy to know Rachin Ravindra won Major League Cricket on his own, apparently.
Yeah, obviously.
But all coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, mate, this is the problem when you give the Slack channel over to Stu. We've got New Zealand news, even if nothing happens. But
we've got to step up our organisation game because for far too long we've let Stu set the agenda, and there's just far too much New Zealand cricket talk on this New Zealand-based cricket podcast.
Well, exactly. Look, we aren't going to start with the New Zealand news.
Okay.
I think where we've got to start this evening, we are going to talk England-West Indies. So another big win for England in their test match summer. We'll talk a little bit about what the implications are for that in terms of the World Test Championship. Spoilers, they still can't make the final, I don't think, unless someone falls over. If you've done better research, then great. We'll talk about whose stock's risen through the course of that series from an England perspective and talk a little bit about the West Indies as well and changes for the Sri Lanka series, which comes pretty hot on the heels. But we are going to start with India, Sri Lanka. We had something that, we have seen a little bit more of in recent times, the super over at the end of that series. So it would have been...
I still don't like talking about them, to be honest.
Yeah, super overs.
Super overs in general, yeah.
So just to clarify to Indian fans, it's not Indian cricket we don't want to talk about. It is super overs. We don't want to talk about and lip. That's your... I guess a version to that marvellous victory by England in the 2019 World Cup.
The 2019 draw that we...
Oh, with the famous asterisk on the trophy. I've seen it up close. No asterisk. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about that series. So India, I think we've said it so many times, an embarrassment of riches in terms of their bench strength. Some different players featured than did against Zimbabwe. Some interesting bowling permutations that I think we want to talk about as well. But yeah, what have we taken away from this 3-match series against Sri Lanka, who, let's face it, weren't really at the races, albeit when you look at the result last night, clearly with a super over that they were, but they shouldn't have been, should they?
Well, I want to push back on that because I mean, Sri Lanka could easily have won at least 2 of these games. And actually in that first game, they were sort of well in the hunt to chase down 200 in that first T20. They were 140 for 1. I think, again, trying to chase down 200 plus is difficult in a T20 match, but they were on track. It's been, as soon as basically Mendes, Kusal Perera and Nissanka, those 3 have been, putting on the runs. We talked about it in the T20 World Cup, right? Those 3 were the ones that basically we were hoping from a Sri Lankan point of view had to get the runs. As soon as they've got out, it's just been collapsible. We saw it last night. We saw it in the game before. I think they lost 7 for 30 odd. And, even in the first game, like I said, they were 140 for 1 and then suddenly just all turned to custard. So I think Sri Lanka have actually been in these games, but India has found a way to win, which I guess from their point of view is pretty encouraging.
Has anything really changed for Sri Lanka, though? Because, as you said, this is the same issue, the same challenge that they've had prior to the T20 World Cup. We know who their best sort of 3 or 4 batters are, and they've got a reasonably good bowling attack, as we've seen in this Indian series. But what I'm hoping for if I was a Sri Lankan fan is the emergence of some middle order players or some T20 or ODI finishers to add some firepower to that side, looking forward to the Champions Trophy. And, results notwithstanding, they haven't seen any development or growth in that part of their cricket, which I think is the big takeaway for me from this series.
Yeah, look, I've got a little bit of a different take from you, Lip, particularly on that first game. I think have been a little bit dazzled by the fact that if we look at, obviously, the World Cup has just happened and India were deserved winners of that and had form throughout the tournament. I think prior to that, we were looking at an IPL where we did see lots of high scores throughout the course of the tournament. And I think a large part of that, and look, again, I want to make a comparison with the 100, which is going on at the moment. Obviously, the 100, 20 balls shorter than a T20. That's spoiler alert there. But I think what we've seen is teams, have kind of gone, oh, well, we've got to continue to go hard because there's less balls. We don't have the impact player rule in that tournament, and therefore we've seen some pretty low scoring games in that tournament because people do keep going and the wheels fall off when you've
Same
not
in Major League Cricket. Actually, some big scores and then
when
they
you've not
collapse for 100.
When you've not got that depth. So my counterpoint, I think, is if I look at that first game particularly, India's top 4 all in the runs and kept going and put up 200. I think if you had the ability as a Sri Lanka team to have not only Nissanka, Mendes, Pereira, Mendes again, and then that middle order, if that could have been strengthened with another impact player, then yes, I think they would have got close. But in the realms of things, to continue at 10 or 11 and over is a pretty tough ask. And I think it's probably inflated a little bit by those impact player rules that we think that they were in that game. Is just my 2 cents. But again, I just come back to the strength in depth for this India side. No Jasprit Bumrah. Obviously, we've got some retirements that you clearly aren't now featuring because they can't because they've retired. But everybody that's kind of come into an extent has had some experience in the world game already, and you've got to step up and perform on the stage if you're an Indian cricketer that wants to force your way in, because otherwise it might be 2 or 3 years until you get another go. So
and on that note, I was really, really hoping personally. I mean, I've got a bunch of players that I kind of like to follow from an Indian point of view. I guess following the IPL, we sort of get our little pet players that we enjoy watching play. And Sanju Samson's been one for me for a while, and he's perfect in the category of that just what you said, Binksy. He gets his opportunity here to finally go in and have a couple of bats, gets a couple of zeros, and probably I would say He'll with the rotation and depth and stuff they have, I'm sure he'll get a few opportunities. But he's not. When you see how they've replaced Rohit and Virat with Shubman Gill steps in, Yashasvi Jaiswal steps in. I mean, again, they maybe didn't take off to the degree. Well, I think Jaiswal good score.
Jaiswal has
good score in one of those games, and he's another one that watching him bat kind of reminded me of how much fun it is to watch that guy bat, because he's just kind of got shots all over the place and over cover and through cover and stuff is fantastic. But poor old Sanju Samson comes in and gets a couple of ducks, and that might be him for a while.
We saw that in the Test series. There were a couple of guys came in and looked really, really good, and there were a couple of guys came in and didn't really put their best foot forward, and they're going to be falling way down the pecking order. On the other side, Asalanka, the captain for Sri Lanka, didn't have a good series. I don't think he made 20 runs in the series, but who's going to replace him? So it just shows the difference in depth between those two nations in the men's game, at least.
Yeah, I think the positive thing for Samson, which might give you a bit of solace, I think we're going to see, Rishabh Pant be a 3-format player for India. And I think with that injury that he had, the fact that he's going to play 3 formats, that they might rotate, and because Sansom has taken the gloves and took the gloves ahead of other keepers, didn't he? In the IPL, I think that's probably a positive for him, is that they see him as someone that might deputise a little bit for Rishabh Pant when they need to give him a rest. So he might stick around because he's he's got the gloves in the bag, which is always a good plan.
Yeah, and look, I mean, you mentioned the scores before. I think probably the extra point on those scores is that it was a very spin friendly kind of situation. Those pitches. I mean, we kind of saw it this morning. I woke up and saw the Crick Info headline this morning before I saw any footage of that game for the Super Over. And I think it said Sky and Rinku spin, seal with something about them winning with the ball. And I was like, what? This is, so they must have scored runs, and then Washington got runs or got the wickets. And then you
no.
And then you go and actually watch the footage. Rinku bowling the 19th, Sky bowling the 20th, and you're like, what on earth is happening here?
Well, and 2 spinners bowling the Super Overs as well, which I can't think of a time I've seen a spinner bowl a Super Over.
The Sri Lankans often do it. I think,
okay.
Thikshana and Hasaranga often, I guess their quality and Thikshana in particular is often bowling up front. He's got that. He's often doing that job and trusted with that job.
In a Super Over. I'm not talking about power
I'm
play.
pretty sure he bowled the Super Over in that game that we went to, Baldy, at Eden Park, where Sri Lanka and New Zealand went to a Super Over. Ish hit a big 6 to to tie it up.
You're
I think
dead
it
right.
was,
Yeah.
I think that was Theekshana. So I mean, I wasn't surprised to see him, but Washington Sundar again, someone being given that responsibility, didn't play those first couple of games. Riyan Parag, turns up and bowls ball, 4 overs and 2 overs. I think that's again, it's kind of hard to read too much from this because of the level of spin. The level of, I don't think that India now thinks, okay, cool, well, we'll bowl Rinku and Sky in every game, even though they came through in the clutch today. But I think Riyan Parag is maybe someone that they can think, okay, well, now in different situations, can we get him into the lineup somewhere and he can bowl 2 or 3 overs, and Hardik can bowl 2 or 3, and we can manufacture our all-rounder out of that. And obviously we saw what Hardik did in the World Cup and how he can play a part with the ball, on his own if he needs to, and we've known that for a while.
Do you think this is one eye on the Champions Trophy and seeing where India are going to get their 10 overs from their 5th bowler from in that tournament, or even more radically, we're going to go in with 3 strike bowlers. We're going to go in with 8 batters and get 20 overs out of a combination of, maybe 4 or even 5 guys bowling 2 or 3 different overs each in that middle period. No? Yeah. Binksy straight away, no?
No, I'm not saying no. I'm saying I really don't know. And the reason I don't know is I think if we look around the world, the analyst plays such a big part now in terms of it's really interesting because we're seeing some old-fashioned commentators in this 100 talking about matchups and saying they're bullshit. But the point I want to really make is I think that India have clearly got that analytical piece in their locker, but it's really difficult to know what the analyst's doing because he's got so many different permutations and people to think about. I wonder how they actually think with clarity around what are even the permutations that we would go in here, because they've got so many that it's kind of difficult to know, well, do we balance the side with, Axar and, Hardik, or do we balance the side with an extra batter who might bowl 1 or 2 overs? I don't know how they even come up with the permutations about how they might make a 15 or 16 man squad work. They've got so many people.
And I actually think more and more the T20 game and the ODI game are so different now. Yeah. I sort of feel like, to answer your question, we're not going to know until we see these 3 ODIs. Like, I think that the T20 game is so distinct now from kind of preparing and building a 50-over innings, even though, as we saw in the ODI World Cup, teams are now thinking, we can make 380, 400, like we can actually just kind of double a T20 score. I still think that the way you sort of build that innings and the way you have to build your phases as a bowler, particularly spinners, the overs that they're trusted to bowl and that teams want to bowl their spinners are so different that, I think that these ODIs will be the biggest judge of what we're going to see.
It will be interesting to see what India do in those ODIs for sure. I think there's going to be some level of experimentation in there. I think India are poised to be able to change the game of cricket again because of the depth of their talent and their ability to just play the Bumrah trump card whenever they really want, right? And particularly, as you say, in the power play and then the death overs, he's the best trump card we've seen almost in our lifetime in terms of the way that he can operate in both of those phases of the game. So I wonder if the new coaching regime are looking at some of these opportunities to go, well, is there a way that we can change the way that we play our cricket and elevate our game to another level, experiment a few hypotheses around, we give this guy an over, that guy an opportunity here and there and see what happens. So not that I'm going to watch a lot of it, but the outcomes of this next 3 ODIs against Sri Lanka are going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and nothing more fascinating than Rohit and Virat coming back into the side as well. So, fresh on their World Cup glory and plenty of pictures with flags and trophies draped around them. But the bowling attack looks, relatively similar to what we've seen in the T20s, doesn't it? So I think obviously no Bumrah in that. So an opportunity, I think. I've been really impressed with Arshdeep for probably the last 18 months or so, to be honest. But we'll see a bit more of him. And Mohammad Siraj is the elder statesman of that seam attack. So be interesting to see game plans and planning and all that kind of stuff as we go into 3 ODIs. But you can't really look past 3-0 India, can you?
No, probably not. Probably not. But yeah, look, we'll see. And I mean, Baldy's comment about changing the game is probably a nice segue into England. But I will say, players that I have loved to watch, I did love watching Pathirana take wickets in that last game, or the second game, sorry. He's so fun when he steams in and slings it down and gets those Yorkers right. He's actually, it's such a joy to watch.
And it's the same segue that we're going to take into this next test series that we're going to talk about, right?
Stumps flying out of the ground.
Because we've got stumps flying out of the ground, bowling attacks that are really enjoyable to watch, and batting lineups that aren't so enjoyable to watch. As we do on this podcast, Binksy, we need to give the victor the spoils first. So over to you. It's been a dominant performance for England. Do you want to give us an opening salvo? What sort of caught your eye in this series?
Look, I think what caught my eye in this series is some brave decisions. Obviously, one of them was made a long time before the series started, and that was that James Anderson was going to play one more game. I've got to admit, I expected to see more bowlers used throughout the course of the series than just Gus Atkinson really coming in. We'd got Dylan Pennington in the squad. We've got Matthew Potts in the squad. I expected we might see at least one of them play, but no, England have been ruthless, I guess. But yeah, I think there's a few people out there saying, well, hold on, you've pensioned off our greatest ever bowler and you haven't really had a look at anybody that's comparable. But I think, the thing that really caught my eye was, Gus Atkinson and also Jamie Smith as well. So a couple of 50s in the series, and one of those was 95, and he looked $1 million for that 95. And I think, as importantly, he kept pretty well. Now, nowhere near in Ben Folkes' class, but better than we've probably seen from Johnny Bairstow and James Bracey and some of the guys that have had it.
You've really got in for Bracey. You throw him into every one of these keepers that haven't done the good job.
Yeah, well, Ollie Pope has been in there as well, mainly through illness and injury on a tour. But they have tried to pick some guys that they think might balance the side a little bit better. I think what they've got right here is they've got a guy that is, and look, I don't mean this to sound harsh, he's an adequate wicket keeper, I think, at this level. I think he'll get better as he inevitably keeps wicket more. But yeah, those are probably the two high points.
Will he hit out? Like sort of the Bashir Leach, like are they going to have that same crossroads at county level?
I think the difference is that a lot of the county championship cricket is played right at the margins of the English summer, so they play at the start and they play towards the end. And I think Smith will become at least a 2 format player in the very near future. I expect we might see him in that ODI side. We play some games against Australia towards the end of the summer. So I think we'll see him playing in those for England. And look, at some point, we'll probably see him in the T20s as well. So to answer your question, I think the only time that really becomes a problem around Folkes or Smith is probably the start of the next English summer, if we want to get him some cricket ahead of, I think we play India next summer. Certainly that's the big series. There might be a test against someone else early in the summer. Yeah. So I think that's probably going to be the only time where there's a real, we need to get him some cricket. But go back to the Ashes, Johnny Bairstow hadn't kept wicket in too much cricket, and they threw him into an Ashes series. So I don't think that's going to bother this regime in terms of having to have a club versus country conversation with Folkes and Smith.
Do you want to talk about Wood? Seeing as we just discussed how he destroyed a few stumps and sent them to the equipment room.
I want to talk about all of the English bowlers because I thought they were fantastic in this series. We expected them to dominate the West Indies batting lineup, and it's certainly, one innings, in the second test, notwithstanding, where West Indies did really well to get a first innings lead in that game. But really, over the course of the series, the England bowlers dominated the West Indies batters from start to finish. And it was all of the England bowlers pretty much. Wokes had a good series. Bashir took a 5 for bowled England to victory in a second innings. And Wood and Atkinson were, as far as I'm concerned, outstanding in different parts of the series. I was particularly impressed with Gus Atkinson, but the combination of Atkinson and Wood together as a bowling partnership that can both bowl north of 90 miles an hour and do things with the ball off the wicket, not just in the air, but off the wicket, has me very excited for an Ashes series coming up. And if you believe the hype and the rhetoric, that's what England are building towards. And I think they're building towards it in absolutely the right way, because those are both guys, when they're operating together, 85, 90 mile an hour plus, are guys that can trouble Australia in Australian conditions. So I was very pleased to see the impact that they had on this series. Wood, but Atkinson in particular, I thought he's outstanding. He's a find for me for this series.
I would, just from a neutral point of view, I think the thing that stood out for both of those guys actually is what Baldy just mentioned there, that the movement. I've always kind of known that those guys, Wood in particular, is rapid.
Yeah.
But that he was extracting some of the deliveries that he was bowling was actually, he was getting the movement, and Atkinson in particular, he's nicking guys off. Like, he's not, he's quick enough, but it's not like he's charging in and ripping people out. He's actually, genuinely, getting edges and proper dismissals. And I think that's probably the most encouraging thing, because you think, okay, well, he's not just fast. He's got a number of tricks in his bag.
That's a game that translates very, very well to Australian conditions, in my view. And that's why I'm really excited to see what he can do for England going forward.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with any of that sentiment. I think there's a couple of things. Number one, these pitches were nothing like we'll encounter in Australia. Number two, the cricket ball is different. And these have been a shit batch of Duke's balls again. They've been changed every 5 minutes. But I do take the premise that I think realistically England have, and it's a bit of a weird one, right? Because we go back to 2010-11 where we last won the Ashes in Australia. And, that attack had James Anderson in it. And he wasn't bowling much quicker than he is now. It had Tim Bresnan in it, who doesn't bowl much quicker than Anderson or Broad bowl now. We had Tremlett, who had a little bit of additional pace and height. So look, I think a lot's made of that, but I think the blueprint absolutely is probably that 81, 82 miles an hour is very, very different to 87, 88. And that's really where Gus Atkinson will operate. It's where Matthew Potts will operate. It's where Josh Tong and Dylan Pennington currently operate.
I'm sure they're hopeful about Jofra as well, aren't they?
And Jofra. And Jofra, I think, and Mark Wood are a different category, because they are in that 90 to 90, 97, if you believe the home speed guns on Mark Wood.
He was he looked pretty quick, I tell you what.
He did, and your point on movement, I think he's always had to use the crease to create angle, and I think what we saw, particularly in this last test match, is he got the ball in reverse. And, although he's, in the nicest possible way, he's had a little bit of a tail burgle, getting, Joseph and Seals and Joseph again.
But he destroyed.
And that is precisely why you want a reverse swinger in there, like a Simon Jones, or from an England perspective, probably the most likely comparison. And just before I kind of finish up on the bowling piece, I think the other really interesting thing for me is we've had to find two guys to take the new ball, because we've had Broad and Anderson have taken the new ball. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this. In the last 12 years, there's only been one occasion when one of them hasn't played. Wow. So if we kind of look at it, and Chris Wokes made a joke about it. He said, "Yeah, it's taken me 11 years to get the new ball." And so that is something, again, that I think we've got to really put into perspective. England are going to need to find the two guys that take the new ball. And Atkinson's, had a pretty good audition, and Woke, certainly in home conditions, I think is the right man for that job.
I completely agree. I liken this England attack now to the Australian attack a few years ago. Different categories of bowler, but when you're able to bring a guy like Brett Lee on at first change who can bowl 145 plus, you can bring Mark Wood on or Jofra Archer on potentially at first change who can bowl 145 plus, and then do a little bit with the ball, and then come back later and do a little bit with the ball going the other way. Really, really dangerous attack. And we pilloried the Chris Wokes decision, but that was vindication as far as, balancing that attack goes for this particular series. I would have liked to have seen them, as you said, give one of the other guys a bowl and see, in the way that India did, experimented a little bit with their bowlers. England had an opportunity to just pick one guy for one test and see what they could do. They haven't chosen to do that. Maybe we'll see that later in the summer. But that was, I think, the only thing that I was hopeful for from that England perspective as far as bowling is concerned. But these guys did the job.
Yeah. I think the other thing on Woakes as well is that there's been a lot made of, this comparison with it was him or Jimmy Anderson. With all due respect to Jimmy Anderson, he's the world's best number 11. Woakes is a pretty good number 8 and, proved that and his runs were really important.
Vital.
Let's talk about this third Test match. West Indies were really in the game with England 5 for 50 odd.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been in the game a few times. A few times. A few of these tests.
So I think when we kind of look at the scores and we look at the fact that these games all finished pretty quickly, there were opportunities for West Indies, and I know we talk a lot about what positives teams take out of drubbings, but the reality is, for 1.5, 2 days, the West Indies were in most of these Test matches, and it was a bad session, either with bat or ball that cost them. And in fairness to England, some good sessions from some of their players who really stepped up, and particularly in this game, that Ben Stokes, Jamie Smith, Woakes, and Atkinson. Lower order, ballast from a runs perspective.
Sometimes it's not even a session with England now. Sometimes it's half an hour. If you have a look at the 4 fastest hundreds by Test sides, the 4 fastest 50s by Test sides, 0 to 50. England own the top 4 spots now, and the top 2 spots were achieved in this series. So it's not that England can take the game away from you in a session anymore. It's that they can take the game away from you inside half an hour, and they can do that with bat and ball, and it makes them so super dangerous.
I had that on my notes. I am finding it kind of staggering how quickly they are turning these games around. Because, I sort of, you turn on the score and it's 50 for 5, and you're like, okay, West Indies are right in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't remember the time. Must have been right when I was about to go to bed. And then you wake up the next morning, they're on 300. Like, you're kind of like, what? What on earth has just happened? So it just, the way they are able to just turn a really tough position, and obviously a lot of that is bravery. Like, they have to be brave to kind of play that way. They've decided. Again, we've talked so much about this Bazball mentality and trusting themselves, but it's working, and there's been times in India and stuff where it hasn't worked, but the speed with which they're able to keep going is something that's catching my eye for sure.
Let's be real. It doesn't work all the time, but it works often enough that it gives both the players confidence that it can work when it needs to, and it gives their fans something to look forward to in terms of, spectating and providing that entertainment package. That is not the be-all and end-all of playing cricket, but that is part of what will bring fans to the games and will support their team.
And I'm sure, I am sure they're doing some stats on this, and I'm sure they're looking at, if we are 5 for 50, if we carry on, how likely are we to get 220? By batting aggressively versus how likely are we to get that by shutting up shop and trying to grind it out and edge out as many runs. And I think they've made the call that they might occasionally blow up and be 100 all out, but it hasn't happened super often. Australia is going to be the biggest.
Well, it puts
test of that.
Playing that way means that the opposition can't have that half an hour where they don't, where they bowl loose balls, or where, it puts the pressure on the opposition to be on that whole time.
And we've seen India respond to it very well in their home conditions. We saw Australia not respond to it in the way I expected them to in the Ashes series in England. Let's see how teams respond to it when England goes and tours those different parts of the world and see what happens in those scenarios. But I would think now, at the back end of this series, England can go to Australia knowing if we're 50 for 5 and we keep going, we are just as likely to end up 350 plus as end up 150 all out. Whereas I think even a couple of years ago, England would think, well, we're probably going to be 120 all out. Yeah. We take a punt and see what happens. But now they're probably taking that punt thinking it's going to come off more often than not. So, yeah, look, the development of this England side, I know you hate for me to say it, Adam, but I am genuinely impressed by it. And I know I'm not just trying to put moles on your team. I am a little bit, but it's only 20% of that. The other 80% is genuine admiration for what they're trying to do with their cricket.
Well, and I think to pick up on that, if we move to the batters, I think genuinely you look at the that you look at if you just looked at the stats, this is pretty much a complete performance by England in this series in terms of winning all those games, and every single player in the side. Maybe Crawley is the one player who averaged 24. Everyone else, you run through the batting lineup, Root averaged 72, Pope 60s, Jamie Smith 50, Brook 49, Stokes 48, Duckett 44, even Wokes 33. Bowlers, Atkinson 22 wickets at 16, Wood averaged 20, Wokes averaged 21, Bashir 27, and Stokes 34, but got through the overs, which I think is almost more important.
That's the most important outcome.
Yeah. So every single player in their squad has contributed something valuable across that series. And yeah, I mean, batters wise, anyone else that you want to highlight?
Well, you've highlighted them all. So yeah, I think probably the one you didn't mention is Ben Duckett, and I think he continues to set the tone alongside Zach Crawley. And I think when you've got those guys with the clarity that they've got in their role to go and do that, I think there are going to be times, particularly in England, and particularly when you're opening the batting, wherever you're opening the batting against quality new ball bowlers, you're going to have a series, particularly a 3-match series, where you don't maybe get going. You might have one score, you might not have one score throughout the course of a series. So for England to have, literally everybody has put in a contribution from a batting perspective. It's been great to see Joe Root kind of back to the way that you want him to play. Harry Brook, I think there's shades of, insert great English batsman here. There's a bit of Peterson in there for sure in the way that he plays. I think is going to be absolutely box office. And then look,
I've been doing a little side note, but I've been doing a bit of research on that England series actually when England was here. Just a bit of other stuff that's going on, and thinking about Brook when he was here in New Zealand. I mean, honestly, that he was in a different class at that time, and it sort of gives you a glimpse of what he can be, and he's just carrying it on, isn't he?
Yeah. Really pleased with where they're at, and another series coming up that we would expect England to win. I think the only dark cloud on the horizon at the moment is Zach Crawley has a fractured finger. I guess it depends how bad that is. He's got 3 or 4 weeks, so if it's a little crack, I'm sure he will be. Yeah, he'll be back out there. If it's a bit more serious, then I don't know who comes in. Dan Lawrence has been the spare batsman around this squad.
Stokes did a pretty decent
job. I think someone was talking about a stat with Stokes. He's opened the batting twice in Test cricket for 165 runs. He's not been out yet, so you never know. He might stick the Superman pants on and go out and open the batting.
It's not a bad shout, really, for Stokes, because I mean, like, he does have a bit of freedom up there, right? These openers are batting with such freedom at the moment, and he can just see ball, hit ball, and he's going to get enough balls in his area. If he plays like a cat on a hot tin roof, as he can do sometimes, and he charges down the wicket and tries to manufacture stuff, the way that they're playing at the moment, it doesn't look out of character at all.
It depends what they want to do, really. Do they want to look at who's the next cab off the rank from an opening perspective? Do they even care what number people bat?
It doesn't seem to change how any of them play.
I don't know. So looking forward to that. Sri Lanka series. We've got obviously Sri Lanka got to finish up these ODIs. There's a little bit of the 100 going on. I think some of the England guys are going to go and play a few games in the 100. I think even Stokes might be playing some games.
Nice.
And then obviously some white ball news coming out of England as well with Matthew Mott resigning today or yesterday.
Yes, the wording was interesting. It doesn't seem like a resignation for me, but again, I think, I mean, credit to you. You kind of called that when we were talking about the T20 World Cup. You said if they don't win the tournament, then you thought that he might be in a bit of strife, and it's proved that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Marcus Stothick's going to come in and coach for the white ball leg of this summer.
Seems like that's short term though.
They've positioned it as an interim. But who knows? Like if he goes well, you never know. And look, I guess McCullum's probably halfway through his what you would see as a 4-year cycle, if there is such a thing in Test cricket anymore. And Trescothick's part of his backroom staff in the test match arena. So I guess for Trescothick, it is a little bit of an opportunity, because I don't think we'll see a one coach scenario for England. I think they'll split the coaches again. They can't pay enough for a start, I don't think, and I don't think McCullum would want that gig. What would be really interesting,
can't because of the scheduling, and that's sort of why I do feel a little bit sorry for Matthew Mott. Because I just think that, I mean, yeah, there's been a big article about England's schedule over the next, I think, 18 months or something, 12 months. And, Ben Stokes has talked about it. We've been talking about it for a while, right? This cricket calendar is just getting just so full.
Full.
Yes, so full. And England's the example. India to a degree, but I think England maybe even more so, where they've got series, a test match series finishing and a white ball series starting the next day in a different country. Like, we've just seen it with India. They win the T20 World Cup, and then 5 days later they're off to Zimbabwe, or however many days it was. And, it's sort of just bananas. And I can see how difficult that must be for any coach that's going to be picking up that role, because obviously England, it seems like England's had a difficult time in terms of balancing, their priorities, because obviously they put a priority on the white ball stuff for a while, and that paid off big time. It got them a couple of ICC trophies. It seemed like when McCullum came in, okay, we need to reinvigorate our test cricket again, and I think that's paid off again. But has it had a slight impact on the white ball stuff, because it means that some of these guys naturally have to actually choose. They can't be on all, like, they can go to the big ICC tournaments, but they can't necessarily play in all the build-up. You can't actually kind of build your squad necessarily in the same way that you might be able to do for test cricket, because you're talking about guys that are 3-4 players. Let's say that's that tour that we just said. If I can't think of the exact one, but if a test series finishes one day and then the white ball series starts in a different country the next day.
Which it does, yeah.
So someone like Harry Brook and Jamie Smith and these other guys that Mike Wood, they're going to have to miss some of these series. They actually just can't play all of this cricket. And that means that someone gets first choice and someone gets second choice in terms of how they balance that. Yeah. So I do feel a little bit sorry for him.
Yeah, I think he's a thoroughly good bloke. Had a lot of success. I think
huge success with Australian women's cricket.
Australian women's cricket team. But I said at the start of the World Cup, I think he was going to go whether they won or lost. I think there was enough to suggest that was the case. What'll be interesting is they haven't done the double whammy of Buttler and Mott both go. So again, you heard it here first on the Top Order podcast. My view is that they're probably not making that call on Buttler now because they want the new coach to potentially not have a say necessarily, but at least get that matchup between a coach and a captain, and are they going to work well together, or is there a directional change that's needed? Buttler is still arguably our greatest one day, or certainly white ball player in the men's game in English cricket history. So I say arguably, there's a few people that might have a claim to that, but he's certainly in the top three. So that's going to be interesting to see where they go. To your point around the scheduling, I think it's really, really interesting the way that we'll see a number of teams go. India have obviously got one, Supremo. New Zealand have had one guy looking after the squad for a period of time, but I think when we actually look particularly at sort of building momentum for one-day international cricket, I wonder whether you need almost a franchise skill set to come in. You're going to need to come in and take a team that have got a 3 or 4 or 5 match series, and you won't see them again. And you've just got to facilitate an environment where they can come in and take the skills from whether they've been playing red ball or T20 and go, right, we're changing the mindset. This is the role clarity that you need. This is the environment that we're going to have. Off you go. Rather than, I know I'm going to get this group together for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. You're not. Yeah. So I think it's a different skill set. And I think we'll see that in world coaching, won't we? We'll see maybe trying to tempt some of these guys out of franchise gigs to almost say, well, it's like having a franchise side. You've got 3 one-day series throughout the course of the year. We'll pay you handsomely for those, and you can still go off and do your franchise stuff in the meantime.
Yeah.
The only fly in the ointment is of course we've got a couple of nations that don't take a massive part in the IPL. So there's still some bilateral cricket going on during those periods.
Absolutely. Just before we sort of finish up on the England stuff, if you touched on the World Test Championship, I do think they're a sniff, because you look at
mathematically, is it possible then?
I get confused by I think mathematically it will be possible. I do get confused by the percentages, because you throw the draws in there and suddenly, I don't know what percentage a draw gets compared to a loss or a win. Because
do you mean points scored, or is it percentage of points on offer?
So you look at, yes, it must be percentage of points on offer, maybe, because you look at England and they've gone 6 wins. I think they've had 13 tests, 6 wins, 6 losses, and 1 draw.
Yes.
And their percentage is like 36.84 or something, whereas I thought it would be closer to 50%.
Well, that's because they've had points deductions for overrates and the like, right? So that the points deductions for overrate have had a big impact on England's percentage.
Yes.
Ordinarily, they would be exactly 50%. I think. But
somewhere around there.
You would think 6 wins, 6 losses, and a draw is 50%.
That's what it seemed to me.
But I don't think a draw is 50% of the total of points available for a test, so it'll be slightly less than 50%. By a little bit.
No, listeners can.
I'm sure.
Correct us
I'm sure Boffins will tell us, but I'm pretty sure that if you tie a test, it's halved.
Yeah.
If you draw a test, it's like a third. And if you win a test, it's all of the points available on offer. And that percentage is the percentage of points on offer to you across all the test matches that you've played.
I think it was 30, 12, and 0 was the original, if I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, we're going too far down. But what I mean is, the point I'm trying to make here, I guess, is that Australia and India are way ahead at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But Australia has a big series coming up against India.
Yes.
And,
you can see them splitting that series, right?
Yes, I think that, I would be, it is in Australia. So, that gives Australia some benefit there. But I think the fact that India's been there the last 2 times, isn't it? And won their series, they're going to be challenging tests.
100%.
And you would think that they're both going to, at some point, take some points off each other.
Yep. 2-2
would be my guess.
Yep.
England has Sri Lanka at home. Then they go away to Pakistan, who they've, that might be a tough series, but they've gone over there and swept them in recent times, haven't they? I think.
Yeah.
Then they come here to New Zealand, who again they've come here and they've had it over us. I mean, I know New Zealand have still won. Neil Wagner's heroics to win that game by 1 run, but I think in the last couple of years that we've had a really difficult time competing with that English batting lineup and trying to slow them down, and like everyone has. But I think there's a real chance that England could go and win 8 or 9 of the remaining tests that they have, and then suddenly they're in a great show. Because
I'm reading an article on the ICC website right now, and I still can't figure out. So England's best possible finish is 62.5%.
Yeah.
And the closing paragraph says, if England register another clean sweep against Sri Lanka, they'll be firmly in the mix to reach their best final. But everybody else, so Pakistan can finish on 77%, Sri Lanka can finish on 84%.
Yeah, but Sri Lanka's,
New Zealand can finish on 79%.
New Zealand's got to go. New Zealand could go on an epic losing streak if you want to be negative, because they've got to go away to Sri Lanka, away to India, and then 3 home ones against England. Yeah. So they've got a very tough run.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if someone can sum it up in the comments, please.
There's millions of permutations, but I think that, let's say India go through and run these 3 on Sri Lanka. In my view, they're firmly in the mix for that World Test Championship final.
England are playing all of their opponents that can stop them from getting to the final, except for Australia and India, I think, before the end of the cycle.
Yep.
So,
and those two take points off each other.
Those two will take points off each other. Probably neither of those will finish on the maximum possible percentage, but England will take points off Sri Lanka, so they win that series 3-0. There's no way Sri Lanka finishes on whatever that ridiculous number was, 84%. There's no way that happens. Even if New Zealand split the series with England down here, that's 50-50. There's no way that New Zealand go above England or stay above England if England have already won 3-0 in Sri Lanka. So I think it comes down to taking care of business at home against Sri Lanka, 3-0, lock that in. And then they've got to take care of business against Pakistan, I think, is the key series for them. If they can beat Pakistan away, again, Pakistan ahead of them on the ladder right now, they'll drop back. England will leapfrog ahead, and then it's a matter of Bradburying their way to the final where Australia and India both take each other out and England sneak
I think
in.
for them, it's probably their hope. I don't think there's any chance that both those two teams fall away, and I think India is the one that is going to cement itself as the number one spot because, like I said, they've got a home series against New Zealand. I think they've got either away or home against Bangladesh, maybe for a couple of games
home,
as well.
2 tests against Bangladesh, and then 5 tests away against Australia.
Yes, right. So but they win those 5 home games, and and I don't think those 5 away games will matter as much. I think they'll be competitive in
They're
that series
more
anyway.
important for Australia, who don't play a lot of cricket outside of that.
This is where our podcast goes way over.
Yeah. Okay. It's only 45 minutes. We're okay for now.
Yeah.
What else have we got to cover off, Stu? What's on? We promised New Zealand news.
Some New Zealand content. So
are you going to make this all about Rachin Ravindra winning Major League Cricket? Because if you do, there are a couple of things that we also need to talk about in that final.
No, look, that was tongue in cheek to put that in that Rachin Ravindra won Major League Cricket, and honestly, I will say that Major League Cricket hasn't really captured me this time around. I think because I think it was a novelty for us last time, and I paid much more attention to it. The fact that there's international cricket, basically international cricket is always just about going to trump any franchise stuff for me. I'm still in that mindset, so. I've been, like I said, been paying much more attention to that. But, it was nice to see Rachin's side obviously win, beating Corey Anderson's side, who is the captain. So I can actually legitimately say the San Francisco Unicorns are Corey Anderson's.
He didn't have a great final though, did he, Corey?
No, he did take a fantastic catch. I think that was in the semi, jumping up and taking a catch. But probably look, you can talk about the Aussies in a minute because both of those two sides were packed with Aussies, and the Aussies, they have obviously it's been a strategic decision. It seems to go to seems like they've put they're going to Major League Cricket, and then are they joining the 100 as well? I think some of the Aussies,
some of them are.
Yeah,
Pat Cummins isn't. He's trying to get an internship at Facebook. Apparently,
is he?
Fascinating.
Well, no, he said that the links to Silicon Valley were important to him in his post-career.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's going to be sliding down that slide at Google.
Right. Fair enough.
It does look quite fun there. The
other cloud service providers are available.
Yes. The thing about Rachin though that kind of caught my eye the most is that he's taken wickets and he's actually finished second in the wicket taking charts. He's and I think that's the next step for us as New Zealand fans, or that we're hoping for in his development as New Zealand fans, because we saw it a little bit with Phillips, and if we can see it with Ravindra, if the two of them, and I actually think as much as Glenn Phillips works incredibly hard on his bowling and has done for a long time, and I think deserves a huge amount of credit for the way he's developed from a wicketkeeper as a youngster to the point where he's taking 5-wicket bags in Test cricket. The way, when I watch them bowl, I think Rachin has a lot of potential to be a legitimately good spin bowler. So, that's to see him actually get that opportunity to bowl, because he doesn't necessarily get many opportunities to bowl, certainly didn't in the IPL, and didn't necessarily bowl many overs for, maybe as many overs we thought he might be bowling for New Zealand by this point in his career, given that he came in to the side as a number 7, being more of an all-rounder. That was his role. He's transitioned more to a batter, but if he can still bat at the top of the order and be someone that we can legitimately rely on to bowl some overs, it's going to make a big difference to how we balance that side. So.
Yeah, absolutely huge for his development. And I think that's a good thing for him to go over to Major League Cricket, because he can have some impact in that tournament. Just touch on it. I don't want to extend this podcast over an hour, Adam, because I promised I wouldn't pre-recording.
12 minutes.
I got 12 minutes. I only need really 2. My take on Major League Cricket, I did follow a little bit more than perhaps you guys might have, mainly because of the time difference. It was kind of convenient for me to have it
it was on in the background.
The score ticker on in the background and just checking the scores throughout the day here in New Zealand. One of the things that I noticed, not only were there heaps of Australians involved, but the number of international players involved. And I think there were a maximum of 6 per team. a lot of the top sides stacked their top 3 or their top 5 with overseas players, played 3, maybe even 4 guys in their top 5 or 6, which I think is fantastic for the tournament in terms of being able to showcase those skills to an American audience. But
I think of the unicorns with Finn Allen and Fraser McGurk as the opening partnership.
Absolutely. I mean, there were lots of sides. I mean, Head and Smith, lots of teams had overseas players in their top 4 or 5. But I think one of the things that I took away from that is that good for the development of like local talent in America? I think one of the things that the IPL has got right in its development is limiting the overseas players to 4, which means you can't stack your entire top 6 with overseas players. Mm-hmm. So if MLC is going to develop in the way that we hope that it will, I think they will need one less overseas player, or they need some mechanism to try and get more local opening bats featuring in that tournament. We've seen Hus had a good tournament. We've seen Taylor have a reasonable tournament. We've seen those guys, feature at the World Cup. But if we're going to get 6 or 7 contenders to play in that top 6 for America going forward, they need to be able to develop those guys through MLC. And I think they need just a subtle tweak to the rule set to get them opportunities.
It's a difficult balancing act, isn't it? Because you want a quality tournament.
You do,
first and foremost.
Absolutely.
If you say to Pat Cummins or whoever, do you want to come over and play Major League Cricket, and you're going to be bowling against, in all respects, 7 teams worth of associate nation, primarily at the moment expats who have gone to ply their trade in the US, they'd probably go, well, nah. But if I get to go and bowl against Travis Head and Phil Anna and Devon Conway and a couple of South African guys, that's probably a little bit more appealing. And then I think it's tweaking it next year, isn't it? Yeah. It's probably saying, right, how much and this is where I think that the way that these franchise tournaments can evolve needs to really have some impacts, is that you're picking a guy like Faf du Plessis who's going to bring on 2 or 3 guys in that squad and be giving of his time and, buy into the franchise and not just rock up for the cash. And I think if you look at the guys that they've picked, a lot of them, I think, fall into that category of guys that have been relatively loyal to franchises they've played for globally.
And good mentors.
Good mentors. And particularly now you've got all the involvement from an IPL perspective, having a stake in some of these teams. They will have a stake in some 100 teams by next year, by the looks of things as well. We will start to see, I think, that exactly what you want to see. And then maybe it's as simple as going, you can play 2 batters and 2 bowlers. You can't play 3 batters and 1 bowler.
Yeah, I mean,
so there's a lot of things they can do.
There's some arbitrary stuff like that. But I think tweaking it slightly so that maybe there's 5 rather than 6, I think is a good thing for the tournament, for the development, not necessarily for the total quality of the product next year or this year. It's
really interesting hearing you two to kind of talk so positively about it. I'm fascinated for listeners and viewers to tell us how they've, anyone from America that's watched it, because as I said, it was a big deal. It seemed a big deal last year, and it'd be, if they can keep that momentum going, we'll be fascinated.
I'd really like to see viewing figures last year versus this year, and then I'd like someone to tell me what impact the T20 World Cup had on that. Yeah, and obviously really, really difficult to measure that. But I'm sure, Baldy, I'm looking at you from a technical perspective. There must be some way that you can correlate people who tuned into the T20 World Cup that then also tuned into Major League Cricket and make some kind of correlations.
I'm sure Nielsen sorted that ages ago. They just ask people what they watched, right? Isn't that what they do? More scientific? Are you looking for something more scientific than Nielsen?
Wow. So, 20 years in the technology industry, and you're coming up with a set-top box where you press a button and say what you've watched.
Yeah.
Excellent. We are in safe hands.
Yeah. The world's in safe hands, I'm telling you now. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best, Adam.
Absolutely. Lip, anything else on the run sheet?
No, not really. I did enjoy Steve Smith's ramp, though. I said I didn't enjoy watching him bat last week, but I did enjoy his ramp for 6 in that final. Yeah. Very nice. But no, that's enough Steve Smith praise from me.
Yeah, well,
for 2024,
it was.
That's the end of it,
and 2025 as well. That was far too much. Right, 54 minutes in. let's wrap this up in less than 6 minutes, which should be relatively easy to do. We didn't get to T20 roller coaster and scheduling, but
we did.
We
talked
a
lot
bit
about the scheduling, didn't we?
All right,
England scheduling.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Oh, we covered it then. That's good.
Yeah, we ticked it all off in less than an hour.
Yeah. So look, we'll be
Good
back.
value for money.
We'll be back next week, and we're going to talk. I think we're going to talk some New Zealand third division club cricket, aren't we?
I hope so.
Yeah, but we will be back in your podcast feeds over the course of next week or so. Cricket carries on all around the world, whatever time of year it is. But we're going to sign off from July editions of the podcast this evening. It's the 31st, isn't it? I think. And we'll be back in your feeds in August. Good night. God bless. See you soon.